Welcome to The Unconventional Path, entrepreneurship and innovation stories and ideas. Hi, I'm Bela.and.mike, a former three-time entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and now the recently retired David D. Ray Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Clarkson University.
And from my office here in Münster, Germany, I'm Mike Wasserman, Professor of International Management at the Münster University of Applied Sciences. I can say it. Well, Bela, as usual, I want to start by thanking our listeners for joining us, and we hope you all enjoy listening to this as much as we enjoyed creating it. And second, just a reminder about our purpose with this podcast. Bela and I both like to learn from smart and interesting people about how the world is changing, how innovation and entrepreneurship are evolving, and overlay our observations and compare them with the lessons that we've each learned over 3+ decades as entrepreneurs, investors, managers, and professors. We thought it might be a cool experiment to do this a little more formally than just sitting around over a cup of coffee like we used to, and share this in a slightly more public way as a podcast. So to do this, we put together our network of interesting friends, former students, and business partners, along with some other people that we've met more recently to bring you interesting stories, ideas, and insights into innovation, entrepreneurship, and the people that take unconventional paths to find happiness at work and in life. Bela, tell us about this week's guest.
Well, thanks, Mike. So this week's guest is Rich Honen. He's an attorney at Phyllips Lytle in Albany, New York, which is a large national legal firm throughout the United States and Canada, I believe. And Rich was actually a guest on our podcast in one of our one of the first 10 or so episodes, where he and I discussed the notion of being an attorney and actually how entrepreneurial being an attorney is, and the entrepreneurial elements of running your own practice and growing that practice and building it. Well, it turns out that Rich, besides being a wonderful attorney and really focuses on venture capital and small startups and helping small startups raise capital and all the agreements that are necessary to do those types of things and just general advice for them. He also has a side business, interestingly enough, and it's horse racing. So he owns several racehorses, and being located here in upstate New York, we have a beautiful track up here called Saratoga Racetrack. And for 6 or 7 weeks every year during the summer, the place explodes with really top-tier horses and races and all the glitz and glamour that goes along with that. And so I was able to talk to Rich and to talk to us about his racehorsing business and sort of how that works and its parallels to entrepreneurship and risk management, etc. So before we dive into the interview, what is one thing that you think our listeners should be focused in on during the talk?
Well, Bela, you know this about me. I'm actually not a gambler. I don't do horses. I don't do poker. I don't go to Vegas, any of these things. I'm not risk averse, mind you, but I prefer contexts where I think I have an advantage, and I decidedly have no advantage in places like casinos and horse tracks and card halls all over the world. I don't just quite have the horsepower for that, I think, if you want me to use a bad pun. That said, I found this conversation extremely fascinating. Little known fact, maybe to most people, but I spent my elementary school years living in Northville, Michigan, which was just a few blocks from a harness track, horse racing track, where they have the little buggies that sit behind the horse. And I think it's still there and still operating. So I know a little about this, but from the business side, this is fascinating. And we talk an awful lot on this podcast about doing something you're passionate about and kind of doing something that makes you happy and satisfied. And, Rich is really, obviously, from listening to this, you'll see passionate about horse racing. And I think this is an interesting story about he and his business partner turned a hobby into a viable small business. So I think it's a story of risk, of doing a deep dive and learning about a business and applying a methodology to something that obviously Rich really enjoys greatly and turning into a viable business.
Yeah, all good points, Mike. So let's dive right into this presentation that Rich made. So this was actually recorded live at an event that we do once a month here in Schenectady. It's called the NYBizLab-Clarkson Lunchtime Entrepreneurship Series. And I have a co-host there, Rick Derrico, and sometimes we interview guests, and sometimes the guest just make a presentation. In this particular case, Rich just gave a talk. And so the sound quality may not be up to snuff as it is with some of our guests where we record them through high-quality microphones in a studio. So cut us some slack on that, folks. But let's get right into the presentation that Rich made about horse racing and owning horses. This is really sort of special for me because I get to introduce not just a great person and a great lawyer, someone who has had a huge impact on the community here, but also someone who's a great friend. So for me, this is really nice. I think most of you know Rich Honen, and let me just give you a little indication of the impact that he and his law firms have had, going back to Honen and Wood and now Phyllips Lytle. Commerce Hub, Fortitech, eTransmedia, X-Ray Optical, Informs. Those are all companies that he has been involved with over the years, and those are some of the big key successes that we have heard about here in this region. So he is a fabulous person, a great attorney, runs a great practice here in Albany at Phyllips Lytle, and he owns racehorses. So we're going to hear about how the racehorse business works. And I think hopefully you will garner some very interesting entrepreneurial elements to that business and managing risk that are part of all business owners. So with that, Rich, come on up.
Thank you. Thank you, Bela. Thanks, Rick. And I know Tony's not here, but thank you, Tony, for this program, which today accepted is usually has great speakers and lots of good things to hear. And thank you guys for everything you do for the community. So we really appreciate it. So horse racing, how does it work and what does it teach us about entrepreneurialism and investing? So big picture, horse racing is part of the agriculture industry. I really wanted to start off by saying agriculture is the third largest industry or something in New York State, and we actually found every other fact about it, but we can't figure out where it ranks. I do know there's 7 million acres of farms, and that New York is number 2 in apples and snap beans when it comes to agriculture, which made me pissed, so I had to go see who was number 1. Anybody know? Wisconsin. Washington for beans, Wisconsin. Anyway, so horse racing is part of that big umbrella of agriculture. It's about a $3 billion a year industry in New York State. It's about 12 to 13,000 permanent employees and other what they call direct employees, and about another 7,000 indirect employees. And any of you who have been in Saratoga, the town of Saratoga in the summer, you could obviously see the effect that horse racing has on the surrounding businesses and things like that. So horse racing in New York is run by a number of agencies, but the people who run the tracks is NYRA, the New York Racing Association. And they run the 3 big horse racing tracks, Saratoga, Belmont, and Aqueduct. And the way it works is, right now, as you know, the horses and everybody are here or up at Saratoga. When Saratoga ends, everybody moves down to Belmont, and they run there throughout the fall, and then they move to Aqueduct, and they run there throughout the winter, and then in the spring, back to Belmont, and then back to Saratoga. And when I say everybody, I mean all the horses, all the trainers, all the jockeys, all the people who work on the horses, the exercise riders, a lot of the people who serve the food and take the bets. It's just one big traveling circus, goes all the way around. And that's the track that they make. So when people say, "Oh, you own horses, where's your horse?" Well, right now my horse is in Saratoga, along with the trainer. We're lucky to be Saratoga. Obviously, the track is the jewel of NYRA. It's the most famous. It's a famous racetrack nationally, probably internationally. You probably know Saratoga started way back. The first race was August of 1863. And which I think is pretty. I was looking at the mural back there. There's a whole mural here of kind of the historical. And I'm looking at the Civil War guys, and the guy in the blue hat could have fought the Battle of Gettysburg, and then a month later could have been at Saratoga for the first race. That's how far back it goes. And there's an entrepreneurial aspect to Saratoga because the guy who started it was a guy named John Morrissey. He was a corrupt Democratic politician. I know. It's a number of redundant terms. But he had part of the Tammany Hall kind of Democratic Party. I think he was a congressman from New York City. He was also a prize fighter. He was like the bare knuckle kind of prize fighter. He was a champion prize fighter. He was an entrepreneur, and he started, among many things, he started a casino in Saratoga, where people from New York City and other places would come up and spend money at night. He later sold that casino to a guy named Thomas Canfield, and to this day it's still called the Canfield Casino, and it sits there, and you can still go to events there. It sits there in Congress Park in Saratoga. But he needed something for his patrons to do during the day, and so they started a horse track. And he got together with his friend William Travers, if that's a name that sounds familiar to you. There's a race named after him. And his other friend, August Belmont, there's a track named after him as well. And they started the Saratoga Racing Association. The first time there were 4 days in the meet. And in those days, the horses would run, you had to win heats. So the horses would run a mile, and then they'd have another race where they'd run another mile, and then whoever won like 2 out of 3 won. Okay, that's when horses were horses. And these days, it's odd for a long race is a mile and a half, and then you have 6 weeks off to rest after that. So that's what goes on in Saratoga. Can I just maybe ask this? How many people have actually been to the track at Saratoga? Okay, so just about everybody. So that's how it works. So the horses at Saratoga, now obviously some of them cost millions of dollars, okay? Just bought by rich people, and they're as weanlings or as yearlings, they're purchased for millions. But there's a lot of horses on the track at Saratoga where they were bought for between, say, $20,000 and maybe $90,000, which is a lot of money, but much different from millions and millions. And those horses are owned by small partnerships that form really the bulk of most of the ownership. And that's why they asked me to come speak here, because I'm in one of them. And so my still best friend, who was my college roommate, and when the reason I say still best friend is when we graduated from college, he was going to law school, but he couldn't write his entrance essay, so he asked me to write it for him. And then he said, why don't you write one too for yourself? So I did. We both got in, and then he left 6 weeks later and stuck me with the apartment on Dana Avenue. And he went off to become a 7-figure-a-year CEO, and I remained a lawyer. But we remained friends. And we used to go to the track every year. And we watched the horses getting saddled in the paddock and said, wow, one day we're going to own a horse. So we were like 45 at some point, and I called them up and I said, a lot of people our age are dead now. So if we're going to do this, we got to do it now. And so that's how a lot of people get involved. We found a trainer. Our trainer is named Rick Schosberg. These are the people who, obviously, they take care of the horses, they prepare them for the track, and they also, importantly, help you buy the horse. There's a lot of good ones. We found them through somebody we knew. And one of the pieces of advice I always give my entrepreneurs when they're seeking investment, I say, if you have an investor and you can't stand to have a drink with them, they probably shouldn't be an investor. Okay, so we were able to have a drink with Rick, and we said we're going to have 1 million questions, and he said fine. So. We found him, and we went and bought a horse, and I think the first one cost in the neighborhood of, say, $40,000. Okay, it was us and some other people. And most of these are formed as LLCs, by the way. The lawyer in me says, I have to tell you that. On the expense side, so the horse, as I said, the horse stays with the trainer, and throughout the circuit. On the expense side, bottom line is we assume that a horse is going to cost about $4,000 a month $4,000 a month per horse, to keep it in, hay and, shoes and teeth. It's like kids, shoes and teeth and some medications. And obviously sometimes there's other expenses, but like say when we buy a horse, and we'll go to our partners and say we're looking for a horse for $40,000, we also escrow 4 months of expenses, okay? If we can't produce after that, we'll usually sell the horse or move on. So that's how it works. Okay, so that's the cost side. So you could buy a horse for as little as $20,000 or $30,000, and obviously you could spend millions. You could buy a horse for $80,000 or $90,000. Sometimes you'll buy them at the sales. You've heard of the famous Fasig-Tipton sales. There's the $1 million sales, but then there's the New York bred sales, and you could buy horses for $70,000 or $80,000 or $90,000, and we've done that. There's other sale places throughout the country. So that's how you spend money. The way you make money, hopefully, is that there's purses, okay? So if you ever go to Saratoga and you say, well, this race, there's a $40,000 purse, okay? What we do with that purse is the winning horse gets, the winning owner gets 60%, second place is 20%, third place is 10%, fourth place is 5%. So fourth place, if you bet on the horse, you haven't made any money, but the owner is still making 5% of the purse. So fourth place is better than sixth. Fifth place gets 3%, and then the remaining horses all split the remaining 2%. So if it's a $40,000 race and you have your horse and you come in third, which isn't bad. There's times when you'll take third. If you really thought you were going to win, then you'll be disappointed. But to actually get a horse to the racetrack, have them get into the starting gate, complete the race, and then get a check afterwards is not bad. Horse comes in third, we get 10%, that's $4,000. 10% of that goes to the trainer, 10% of that goes to the jockey, and we're left with $3,200, which keeps the horse in hay for a month. That's not an awful day for us. What you might want to think about is, except for the big Breeders' Cup type races, so these jockeys, a lot of times, even if they win that race, what are they going to get? $2,400? It's not bad, okay? But there's races where they get a few $100s, and this is for, a jockey weighs 110 pounds. They're riding a 1,500-pound horse up at 40 miles an hour with one hand, right? Because they're holding the whip in the other, among 10 other horses. Sometimes it's raining. Sometimes there's mud. You've seen them. They have the goggles. They'll have 5 sets of goggles that they pull down as the goggles get filled with mud. They pull them down. You see them after the race. They have them all hanging. They used to throw them, but I guess they felt that was bad. So these guys might get $400 for doing that. All right. So next time you talk about overprivileged athletes, these guys are not. So that's how it works. So that's how hopefully you make money. Everybody with me so far? I guess it's not a Q&A. Where is Rick? Did Rick already leave? Okay. Rick, you're going to let me know when I run out of time, right?
Awesome.
Okay. Like 2 more minutes? Okay. Yeah. He's like on the phone. The next thing is actually getting the horse in a race. So the whole idea is there's somebody called the racing secretary, and they're the ones who make up the races. And the whole idea is you want to try and get horses of like abilities in the same race. You don't want a really good horse running against a lot of really bad horses. It's not fun. It's not great for the horses. You try and get it as equal as possible. And there's really only a few variables when you're riding a race. There's long races and short versus short races. Anything up to a mile is considered a sprint. Above a mile, it's considered a longer race. There's races on the dirt, the actual track, and then there's races on the turf, on the grass that's on the inside. There's races for, there's boy horses and girl horses, so there's races for males and females. There's New York breds versus open company. So those are kind of the variables. And then there's usually what you start with is how much the race is worth. So right now there's a book that anybody can get that tells you what the next 2 weeks of races are going to be at Saratoga. So we'll have a horse and we'll say, okay, there's a race coming up next Thursday, and it's a 7 furlong race for fillies and mares 3 years old, a 3-year-old female horse. And it pays $40,000, and it's for horses who have never won a race before. That's another big condition. Horses who have never won races, referred to as maidens, get special races. Then once a horse wins, there's races where you say, well, you can't be in this race if you've won more than one race or more than 2 races or 3. So those are the conditions. All makes sense so far. The thing that blows everybody away is the concept of claiming races. First of all, does anybody know what they are? Claiming races? Have you heard the phrase? Okay. This sounds kind of nuts, okay? But a claiming race means that anybody, any owner or any trainer at the track, if a horse is in a claiming race, you can buy that horse. You can walk into the racing office 2 minutes before the race, up to 2 minutes before the race, and say, I'm going to claim horse number 3. And the race is written with a claiming price. So next time you go, and it says, $45,000, fillies and mares or something, the first thing it'll say is claiming. It might say allowance, it might say stakes. Usually, most of the races in America are claiming races. It'll say claiming, and then it'll say the claiming price, $40,000. You went to your horse in that race, and you are taking the chance that anybody, any other owner, can buy that horse for $40,000. Okay? Which is kind of weird. And so you'll find out, you make that decision 2 minutes before, which kind of gets us into the idea of first of all, does everybody get that? Just by the way. Now, the idea is supposed to be that, Bela put it really well. You don't have D1 athletes competing against D3 athletes, okay? Because you could, when you read the program, you could say, oh, this horse cost $200,000 at the Saratoga sale last year, and now they're running the horse for $40,000. Or you say, this horse, has never won. I can understand why they're running it for $40,000. But a lot of time, what do you do with that $250,000 horse that suddenly is in a $40,000 claiming race? So we could go buy it if we want, and we could say, wow, this is great. We can get a $250,000 horse for $40,000. And of course, then you start thinking, well, why would they do that? Why would somebody lose $210,000 worth of value? There's got to be something wrong with the horse. And now, nobody would run a horse that is unsound, okay? Nobody knowingly does that. But sometimes, listen, the horse is going to be fine, but it's going to have a knee or a shoulder or an ankle or a stifle or, a hock or whatever these parts of horses are. And there's going to be an issue. So you say, yeah, I want to get rid of the horse. The problem is they know, the owner of that horse knows what we're thinking. And he or she might be thinking, you know what, I'm going to run this $250,000 horse in a $40,000 claiming race. I'm going to put bandages on the front and back legs of the horse, and so everybody thinks I'm trying to hide something. And who knows, maybe I pick up a nice $40,000 purse, I retain my horse, and I got a quick win. And because we're thinking now, do you think he really means to lose the horse? So that's how it goes.
Is the price to buy the horse related to the size of the purse, or no?
It's usually close. Okay. It's usually, the question was, the size of the purse and the size of the claim, they're usually pretty close. And there's some other rules which I won't go, from the pregnancy row. I was sitting in a row, it was me and two pregnant, I shouldn't say two pregnant women. I asked if I was see, Julie, you're in the wrong row.
We're making you uncomfortable.
Okay, now go ahead.
When someone claims the horse before the race and that horse were to win the race, the purse goes to who?
Good. So did you hear the question? If the horse gets claimed, but the horse wins the race, who gets the purse? I should have said that. Thanks for bringing that up. The original owner, the old owner, gets the purse. Okay? So by the way, when you claim a horse, you're really hoping the horse comes in second. Because one, it means the horse probably doesn't suck. And two, it means that the horse has now not. Remember, I said there were some races where if you won 2 races, you can't be in that race. The horse has now not satisfied that condition. You could run that horse back in the same kind of race. So the answer is the old owner gets the purse. Okay? It used to be, up until fairly recently, no matter what happened to the horse, you bought the horse. So tragically, if the horse broke down, you were the proud owner of this horse that was no longer alive. This is the new owner. Fortunately, they changed that rule. It's still pretty tight. I think if you claim a horse and the horse has to be vanned off, it actually has to be taken off, which doesn't always mean that the horse is going to die, by the way. A lot of times it just means being careful. You then have 30 minutes to have your vet look at the horse. And yeah, I know it's quick, right? You have 30 minutes to decide whether you want to proceed with the claim. But that's a long answer to your question. All right, there's something else I was going to say, but I'll just add on to that. So the claiming game is where most people buy their horses. And here's where we get into kind of the due diligence of it. So we found our trainer, Rick Schosberg, and we said, okay, we have $40,000, go get us a horse. You read the racing form, just like everybody else. You read the racing form, you say, oh, there's a claiming race next Tuesday, and you look through everything. There's this much information, right? The horse has probably run 4 times, and you say, yeah, the horse looks pretty good. So you spend, 8 minutes reading that. Then your trainer will try and find out something from the other trainer. Say, hey, listen, I see you have a horse in for a tag. They call it in for a tag. You have a horse in for a tag. Anything I should know? I have a good set of owners. Trainers don't always love losing horses. Sometimes they're thrilled to get rid of the horse. But a lot of, they make money through horses. So there's that. And then there's the final part of the due diligence. And I think the lesson here is that your due diligence has to fit your situation. All my friends, and Dick, you and I think the last time we talked about this, I was like, oh, all you VC guys are like, oh yeah, it's going to take me 3 months of due diligence. When we buy a $60,000 or $80,000 horse, you're allowed to watch the horse walk from the barn to the paddock. You're not even allowed in the paddock. The paddock is that area in the middle where they saddle the horses. If you're going to claim a horse, you're not allowed in the paddock. So I'm standing, this just happened to us on Sunday. We tried to claim a horse. I'm standing with my trainer, and we're just standing by the fence. And first of all, he's on the phone. And finally, my friend was like, hey, Rick, do you mind getting off the phone and looking at the horse that we're trying to buy? And I swear he went like this. So the fence is here. We're standing. He goes like this. Okay, let's buy it. Now, sometimes he does that and he says, no, we're not going to buy it. And then he explains, it's really cool because like every other expert in the world, they see things that you and I just don't see. He'd be like, oh, the left hock was a little bit misshapen. I was like, where's the hock again? Because on horses, everything, like what you think is a knee in a horse is actually their ankle, and what you think is their ankle is actually their heel. Everything is like one joint off from what you think it is. But that's the amount of due diligence you do, which is the other lesson, by the way, for entrepreneurs is, for us as entrepreneurs, we try and think, I know everything, I control everything. You really have to get good at delegating not only responsibility, but delegating decision-making. That's the hard part. My friend, has been a CEO forever. I've been in management positions in law firms for a long time. I'm very comfortable with delegating. There are those who say I over-delegate. But you got to be comfortable with that because you know nothing about this. Somebody points and says, well, that ankle's a little swollen. So that's kind of a lesson for entrepreneurs. And then you go ahead and either you buy the horse or don't. One final thing on that, because it's Saratoga, everybody wants a horse. So this particular horse that we tried to buy, 7 other owners and trainers tried to buy it. So there were 8 claims on that horse. So the way they resolve it, and this is like charmingly low tech, everybody goes into the racing office after the race. Okay, and the horse did okay. I think the horse came in second, actually. The horse did exactly what everybody wanted it to do. Ran well, came in second. And it was really cheap. It was like a $16,000, which is, that's an inexpensive horse. And they write the names of each of the claimants on a piece of paper, like on an index card. And they turn the card over and they put a number on it. Okay? And then they put dice in a cup. And they shake the cup. And it's actually called a shake. So you'll say, oh, there was, a 3-way shake, a 7-way shake, and there was an 8-way shake. And they shake it, they go like that. It was number 8, they turned it over, and it was a Gulo, I think it was. I'm trying to remember who the owner and the trainer was. And I remember Linda Rice was like sitting right next to me, and she was like, oh, damn it, because it was just a horse she didn't get. And that's how they resolve it. The trainers will also usually put $100. They'll each put $100 into a pot, and then the winner gets that. And the joke is that's to pay the vet bills for the horse. So I mean that's the rudiments of it. What I can tell you is like other things that you do in life, if you're just doing it for the money, well, especially this, if you're just doing this for the money, don't do it, right? We've actually been pretty lucky. We put in money, 15 years ago, and haven't had to put much more in. Because, when you do win, if you win a $60,000 race and, have 60% of that, that buys a lot of hay. And so we've had some luck, and we've been really good at looking at listening to our trainer. Even now that, we've been doing it for long enough that, we don't ask as dumb questions like what's the difference between straw and hay, which I think was the first thing I asked him, and I think he almost gave us our money back. But we've done okay. But you have to like more than just the money, just like in the jobs that we all have right now. And the benefits are, with your owner's card, besides free parking, what you can do is go in the mornings and watch the horses work out. And has anybody ever done that? Just gone to the track? Yeah, okay, everybody has. So you've all seen it. It's amazing. For me, I'm at the stage now where that's actually more fun for me than going to the races, because for those of you who try and find a way of doing it, find somebody and have them take you back. Yeah, Dick.
Just a quick question. For most of the syndicates, how many horses do they own?
The question was, for most syndicates, how many horses do they own? So we're pretty small. For a long time, we owned a lot of them own 1 or 2 horses, okay? And we call it a syndicate, but it's 4 friends who got together and said, all right, $12,000 each, we'll take a shot. It's kind of like owning restaurants. Everybody likes to say they own a horse. I got a seat in the restaurant. And so, but some of them, we have 5 right now. And some of them, the really big ones, like West Point is probably the biggest one. Jeff, you know those guys real well. And by the way, the person here who knows more about all this than me is Jeff Schwartz, my law partner. So he will correct everything I've said after this in a short follow-up. But West Point has hundreds. Hundreds of it. That's it's just a different thing. But most of them, we probably have 20 people. I mean, some people are in for $1,000. You know what I mean? But anywhere from 4 to 20, let's say. And that's why, by the way, if you ever go to the paddock in Saratoga, and sometimes there's 400 people standing around a horse, that's why. Because there's 20 people, and they've all brought, their friend, and their mom and everything. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
How often can your horse run?
Good question. The question was, how often can the horse run? If everything's good and everything's healthy and everything's sound, you might try and get your horse to. We every 3 weeks, let's say. There's some trainers who could run a horse every 2 weeks. Some horses could only run once a month. Pretty much every 3 weeks is what we look for. So at Saratoga, we had a horse that just did awful, but we had a horse that just ran on Sunday, and the good news is the horse, he'll be able to run again, at Saratoga. And that's, that is one of the things. Let me just finish the other part. So you have to enjoy the other stuff, the non-money stuff. So go to the track in the morning. I love it. If you go to the track at 5 in the morning, there's 100 horses on the track, all working out at various speeds. All being ridden by these exercise riders who are like 80-pound women who are just muscling these horses around. The steam's coming off the horses, and it's really cool. So that's a fun thing to see. So you have to like that part of it. And I like still just going into the paddock and while they're saddling the horses, talking to the jockeys and stuff. And sometimes we walk the horse onto the track. So the problem is the horses can't always run every 3 weeks, and that's the thing you got to be ready for. And that I think is kind of the final. Is Rick giving me the sign yet?
No, you're good.
Okay. But one of the things I'll say is, bad things happen. Not terrible things, but the horses get hurt, and they get hurt in every way you could think. We've had horses. We had a horse actually step on a rock like a pebble, and came up lame. We had a horse who banged his head on the top of his stall, and I don't know, do horses have concussions? But we didn't feel comfortable, So you have that, and then you have lots of terrible things that could happen, and then they're just they're athletes like everything else. Plus they're tremendously inbred, right? So they're fragile. Plus if you ever look at the physics of a 1,400-pound horse running at 40 miles an hour, and the smallest bone in his body is basically the ankle, the seismoid or something like that. That's a lot of force, and a horse, comes all the way off the ground when it runs. So a lot of bad things can happen. They're also banging the hell out of each other. If you ever watch, there's a lot of contact. They're just hitting each other, and, kicking and stuff. Yeah.
How's it decided what jockey rides what horse, and how many times a day can they ride?
The question was, how do you decide what jockey and how many times a day can they ride? The jockeys will ride every race if they can. Okay, which is weird. You'll see a guy win the Travers, for $3 million, and then he'll run, a $40,000 allowance race, when everybody's walking home. The jockeys are usually affiliated with trainers. J.R. Velasquez may ride for Todd Pletcher, but if they're free, they will ride for you. And in fact, they're pretty entrepreneurial too, because you'll be at the barn in the morning, and the jockeys will come around in a little cart and sometimes say, "Hey, do you need anybody today? And sometimes there's a conflict. We had a jockey, I think it was J.R. J.R. Velasquez, great jockey. He was going to ride one of our horses. And then Pletcher, Todd Pletcher, a much bigger outfit than us, entered a horse. So he said, "I'm sorry, I have to get off. I have to get off the horse," which, you want to get mad about, but you really can't. I will say, I think it was in that race, his horse reared up in the paddock. He got thrown off, didn't get hurt, but his horse got scratched, and I think we came in second. So, question back there.
What are the ongoing costs?
Yeah, so the ongoing costs. Yeah, the $4,000 a month will do feed and and most of the there's a lot of medications they take there's Lasix, which is the anticoagulant. That's one of the bad things. Horses bleed when they run. All right, there's a lot of air going through their nostrils and their lungs, and it actually causes blood. And if it gets really bad, the horse can't run. It doesn't kill him, but imagine it's like you running being congested. So you take Lasix, or you give the horse Lasix, which is a coagulant and stops them from bleeding. That's one of the things. There's a bill right now in Congress where they're trying to make this all uniform. And one of the questions is, should we stop giving horses Lasix, for example, because maybe you're giving them drugs that are making them kind of run beyond what they should be doing. So anyway. So Lasix is a big drug. They take naproxen. They actually take naproxen, like Aleve. Like I was at the barn once, and my back was hurting, and my trainer said, "Here, you want a pill?" And he gave me a horse pill of naproxen. It was like this big. And sometimes there are, but $4,000 a month takes care of most of it. Sometimes there's a procedure that somebody will. First of all, we almost always geld our horses. Sorry, but we don't have the $1 million horses. One, it makes them easier to handle. But the other reason why you geld a horse is apparently they get too muscular if you don't, for them to have muscles up front actually can upset their gait. So at least that's what they say. So every once in a while there's a big operation. And I will say one thing. Whenever one of our horses gets hurt, even if we know the horse is going to race again, we always pay for the operation. We get the horse, stable. The horse could probably not run again, but they could still, be a horse. Our trainer is the head of the New York State Retirement, what's it called? New York State Retirement Association? I forget the name of it, Jeff. No, it's not the Thoroughbred Association. There's not like the Thoroughbred Retirement Association or something, and he's in charge of who find like homes for these race horses. So we had a great horse that got hurt, spent $15,000 on his operation, then gave it to a little girl on a farm in Kentucky, and she sent us a picture of him with ribbons in his name and stuff like that. I'm sorry, there's a question. Yeah, Ken.
Rich, in the sport horse, you buy insurance. Can you insure?
The question was, can you get insurance? Not for horses. Not for a horse. You could, but it would be prohibitively expensive to insure a $90,000 horse. Okay, you insure the big horses, and you could get in for the really big horses. You could also get insurance. You could actually get fertility insurance. So if you have, a stallion that ends up not being a stallion, you could actually insure against that. And one aside on that, the insurance will cover a horse that can't perform. A couple of years ago, I don't know what year this was, Fusiaci Pegasus Japanese horse, I think, that won the Kentucky Derby. And they syndicated it in Japan for millions of dollars. And the horse did not perform, did not, as they say, did not cover his mares, okay? And they went to get insured, and it turned out that the horse, he could perform, but he was not interested. So he was an equine leader in the LGBT community, and so he was fine, and they didn't get the insurance. And there's some really funny scenes of like a lot of Japanese guys in white lab coats trying to like figure this out. So the answer is you don't insure horses at our level. The really big horses you might. One other thing I do want to say. I said a couple of things on the entrepreneurial side. Listening to people and things like that. I really think one thing. All right, go ahead. The biggest race we ever won was a couple of years ago in Saratoga. We won a race called the With Anticipation. It was a $200,000 race. And we won it with a 2-year-old filly who was in her second race. Somewhere, Alyssa, you might have seen this, somewhere, hopefully not on YouTube, my friend Michael, who my still best friend, he's about 6'2", 6'3". At the end of it, somebody was filming us watching the race, and at the end of it, Michael basically jumps and mounts me. Okay, so that was pretty. And both my kids were there that day too. So that's the other thing. When you actually when you win a race, I've told people winning a race is being in the winner's circle at Saratoga with your kids. It's one of the very few experiences in life that is as good as you anticipated it to be. And it's just a remarkable experience. Now, sometimes you don't win. Most of the times you don't win. I think the lesson there is we as entrepreneurs, we think that our job is to control everything, to control the world. We're going to control things. We're not going to let it, we're going to have everything planned out. One thing this teaches you is, these are horses. You can do everything right. You do everything right. You find the right horse. You find the right rate. You train it the right way. You find the right race. You get a good draw on what's the word? Thank you. What post position you have, right? You come around the final turn and you're perfectly positioned, and the horse just doesn't fire. And you ask the jockey afterwards. The jockeys, most of them are Hispanic, and they're all bi and trilingual. Although I've noticed when they lose, they're a lot less fluent than, so like when they lose, I'll be like, Louise, what happened? She didn't want to run, and when they win, it's like, oh, the horse broke alertly from the first post and then moved up. But my point is, you do everything right, and it just doesn't work. And so you start, we think as entrepreneurs we're supposed to control everything. And it's a really good lesson that, you have to have some humility in the face of the universe. Okay? The universe is what we live in. It's not what we control. And I think that's one of the best lessons I learned from that. I would, pass it on to all of you. And with that, that's all. Oh, that's all I got. Okay.
Bela, that was great. So what are your key takeaways from this? You ready to go out and buy a horse?
No, like you, I'm not risk averse, but I've been to Vegas once. I put $20 in my pocket, and I went down to the casinos, and within 15 minutes, the $20 was gone. And I've been to the racetrack once. betted on, again, put $20 in my pocket, made some $2 bets, and by the end of the day, the money was gone. So I'm not a gambler either. However, I do think there were some really interesting points. So one of the things Rich talked about, which has a real parallel in entrepreneurship and starting your business, is all about managing risk, right? There's some things you can control. There's some things you have influence over. And there's some things that are just totally independent of you. You have no ability to control them or influence them. And you have to have these in the right balance, and you have to understand which one of these is which and what falls into these categories. because there's no sense in lamenting over things that are out of your control. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So focus on the things that you do have control over. In Rich's case, it's which horses they buy, it's which trainer they use, it's the amount of money they spend, which races they enter, right? Those are the things they have some control over. How that particular horse will do on a particular day, because how it's feeling, that they have less control over that. So I thought that was sort of interesting. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I thought the amount of homework that was required to do this was incredible. I just kind of made the assumption that, okay, people just buy these things and then they give them to the trainer and the trainer does it and they just write checks and that's it. And it's not really viewed as a business. That was always kind of my impression. But yeah, the amount of homework, the ability to see the value or the lack of value in a horse. I mean, the story he told about just looking at the horse and figuring out what was wrong with it just in a couple of seconds is a true expert skill. I know people that can do this with cars, with art. So, over the last couple of decades, I've met people who really have this ability to look at something and see what's right or wrong with it in just a few seconds. And I've always had a ton of respect for this expertise. It's something that I'm clueless about, I think, in all aspects of life, but that's okay. Hang out with people smarter than you, right? That's my rule. But I thought that was really, really amazing. The ethics involved, he talked about kind of making these decisions about when to run a horse or not. And I think this is really important. And then all these things behind the scenes, right? It took a ton of investment, not just of his money, but to go to the track and to talk with the trainers and, to deal with this kind of milieu that's behind the scenes at a race course. I think is pretty incredible. So there's the financial component of this, but then there's this also huge non-financial component that was not quite as evident to me. So I think it's this blending of this two, and I think any business is the same. You can make stuff, but if you don't understand the context that your customers and your suppliers are in, if you're not mixing with them and getting to know them and figuring out how they best operate, you're not optimizing your business. So I thought this was a cool example of applying some really interesting business principles to what essentially was started as a hobby and transformed it into an actual viable business.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more, Mike. I think we've said this before, that, each industry, there's some fundamentals that span across all businesses and all industries, but each industry has some subtleties that you only understand after you spend some significant time in that industry. So if you're going to enter an industry and you don't have that deep knowledge of that industry, you got to do what Rich did. You got to go find some experts who can supplement your knowledge and your ability and give you that guidance, particularly in the early years. And it's interesting because that's fundamentally the profession that Rich is in, right? He is an expert when it comes to negotiating, bringing capital into your business, business formation, selling your business and the agreements necessary to, have a larger company buy your company, et cetera. So he does that day in and day out. He provides that expertise to others because, if you own a business, you probably haven't seen many merger and acquisition documents, but Rich has seen hundreds of them. So you hire an expert. Well, Rich is entering the racehorse business, and he applied that same principle to himself. I got to go find some experts. So there's a good, valuable, fundamental entrepreneurial lesson there, I think. The other thing I thought that was interesting was when he first talked about these claiming races. And at first gush, he talked about, up to, I think it was 5 minutes before a race, if your horse is entered in a claiming race, any trainer, any owner can buy your horse for a predetermined amount of time. And when I first heard that, I said, this is crazy. But then as you think about it more, it makes a lot of sense. And I can understand why they had that in there. It's basically to keep the Division I horses from racing in the Division III races and, always dominating them. So it's a way of sort of keeping the playing field a little more level. It's a way of sort of protecting the farm team, if you will, or the lower division horses, let them develop and let them mature and let them win a little bit of money, so that they can make their way up into the bigger races. So I thought those were some interesting points. Anything else you want to chat about here on this one, Mike?
No, I mean, I thought two things is one is the thing about the jockeys, the training jockeys, right? And that subculture was really interesting to me too. I thought jockeys just were these little people that wore these singlets. No, singlets are what the wrestlers wear, but I forget the name of the outfit, right? These funny little outfits.
Silks. They're called the silks, I think.
Singlet, silks. I was close. My brother my stepbrother was a wrestler, and he used to wear a singlet. But these silks and just did this thing. But I didn't realize that there was this whole kind of cultural thing. So that was interesting. But the last point that I'll make that I thought was fantastic is quote that he told his friend, a lot of guys our age are dead now, right? So let's do this, And I think that that's kind of I don't like to look at the glass half empty or glass full, but at our side of the age arc here, Bela, right? I mean, there's some truth in what he says, right? As if you have this passion and you want to do something, act while you have the opportunity. Be thankful if you have the health and the financial wherewithal or access to capital and take advantage of it. So I think this is a neat story to think about too for those of us that are getting older. And if there's something in our mind that we kind of wanted to do, that take a chance, do it.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. Somebody once said to me, there's 1,000 reasons not to do something, and there's only 4 or 5 reasons to do something. But you got to act, and if you don't have that bias for action, you end up reflecting back on your life and saying, "Gee, I wish I shoulda, coulda, woulda done something," and you didn't do it. So. Yeah, that was an interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because he did talk about that. It's like, okay, if we're going to do this, we got to do it now.
Yep, love it.
So that's it for this week. Thanks for spending time with us. You want to wrap it up, Mike?
Sure. We're absolutely thrilled that you joined us in our podcasting adventure for this week, and we hope that you found it interesting and thought-provoking. As usual, we have a couple of small requests. One is if you have questions about what we discussed today, suggestions about topics or potential guests for down the road, please do get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com, and yes, we will answer you. Second, if you like what we're doing, please hit like or subscribe or whatever the positive feedback mechanism is on your podcast app of choice. And if you really want to do us a solid, consider writing us a quick short review would be awesome. And of course, if you know other people that might find this interesting, please feel free to share us with them.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, and we look forward to having you join us again next week. This podcast is produced for Mike and I by our friends at Busy Media of Schenectady, New York. They can be found at busymedia.co.